Judge Michael adjusted his reading glasses and surveyed the packed courtroom from his elevated bench. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Denver's family court, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. In his 20 years presiding over family law cases, he thought he'd witnessed every variation of human drama: bitter divorces, custody battles fueled by revenge, parents using children as weapons against each other. But nothing could have prepared him for what was about to unfold on this seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning in late September. The case file before him read, a custody modification hearing that appeared straightforward on paper, and David, married for 10 years, divorced for 18 months, fighting over their only child, 7-year-old Emma. The mother sought full custody, citing the father's alleged neglect of their daughter's serious medical condition. The father wanted joint custody reinstated, claiming the mother was unstable and manipulative. Judge had read these accusations 1,000 times before. They always felt the same: angry, hurt people saying terrible things about someone they once loved. But then Emma walked into his courtroom, and something felt immediately different. The little girl moved slowly through the heavy oak doors, her small hand clutching the handle of a professional service vest worn by a beautiful golden retriever. The dog, whose vest identified him as Bailey Medical Alert Service Dog, walked with trained precision beside her. Emma's dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she wore a blue dress that looked slightly too big, as if she'd recently lost weight. Her face was pale, almost translucent, with dark circles under her eyes that no 7-year-old should have. She looked like a child who'd seen too much, experienced too much, carried burdens far beyond her years. The courtroom, which had been buzzing with the usual pre-hearing chatter, lawyers conferring with clients, court reporters setting up equipment, bailiffs checking paperwork, fell into an unusual hush. There was something about the sight of such a young child in a custody battle that always sobered people, reminded them that real lives hung in the balance of legal arguments and judicial decisions. Emma was directed to a seat in the gallery, several rows behind where her parents would sit. Bailey immediately positioned himself beside her, sitting at perfect attention in that way only highly trained service dogs can manage. The girl's hands gripped the dog's vest so tightly her knuckles turned white. Judge noticed her eyes darting nervously between the two tables where her parents would soon sit, her mother's on the left, her father's on the right, as if she were trying to calculate impossible distances, measure invisible dangers. Entered next, and the contrast couldn't have been more striking. Where Emma looked fragile and frightened, appeared polished and composed. She wore a conservative navy suit with a pearl necklace, her makeup applied perfectly to suggest concern without overdoing it. Her hair was styled in soft waves that framed her face. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who believed right was on her side. As she took her seat at the plaintiff's table, she turned to glance at Emma, offering what was meant to be a reassuring smile. But Judge, trained to observe micro-expressions after 2 decades on the bench, noticed something odd in that smile, something that didn't quite reach her eyes, something that made Emma physically recoil in her seat. David looked like a man who hadn't slept properly in months. His suit was wrinkled despite obvious efforts to press it. His tie sat slightly crooked. Dark stubble shadowed his jaw, and his eyes held a desperate, haunted quality. He walked to the defendant's table with the bearing of someone who'd already been defeated too many times, who'd learned not to hope too much. When he spotted Emma, his entire face transformed, relief, love, and heartbreak washing over his features simultaneously. He raised his hand in a small wave, and Emma's expression crumbled. She looked like she wanted to run to him, but was frozen in place by some invisible force. Judge called the court to order, his gavel striking wood with a sharp crack that made Emma jump. "We're here today for a custody modification hearing in the matter of V. Counsel, please state your appearances for the record." As the lawyers introduced themselves and began their opening statements, Bailey suddenly stood rigid. His ears perked forward and his entire body went on alert. Judge had seen service dogs work before. His own sister had a seizure-alert dog, and he recognized that particular stance. The dog was detecting something. Emma's breathing quickened, becoming shallow and rapid. Her small chest rose and fell visibly beneath her dress. One hand remained locked on Bailey's vest, while the other moved to her medical alert bracelet, the kind that warns emergency responders about diabetes. Her face grew even paler, if that were possible, and tiny beads of sweat formed on her forehead. "Ms., are you all right?" Judge interrupted the attorney mid-sentence, directing his question toward the child. Several people in the courtroom turned to look, including both parents. Emma's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at her mother, then at Bailey, then back at the judge. Her expression was that of a child caught between loyalty and truth, fear and desperation. She shook her head, not in response to his question, but as if trying to shake away thoughts she couldn't voice. Half rose from her seat. "Your Honor, Emma sometimes gets anxious in new situations. She's fine, aren't you, sweetheart?" Her voice dripped with maternal concern, but Judge noticed Emma didn't answer. Instead, the girl's eyes filled with tears that she desperately tried to blink away. "Does she need medical attention?" the judge pressed, watching Bailey's continued alertness with growing concern. No, assured quickly. "She just needs a moment. She knows Mommy's here if she needs anything." But Emma's hands had begun moving, small, deliberate gestures that most people would dismiss as nervous fidgeting. 3 distinct taps on her left wrist. 2 fingers pointed downward. A fist that opened and closed rhythmically. And Bailey, still standing at attention, began to pull, not toward Emma but toward the front of the courtroom, toward on the witness stand. David sat forward suddenly, his eyes widening. He'd seen those hand signals before. He'd helped design them. And the pattern of Bailey's alerts, that wasn't the low blood sugar warning they'd trained for emergencies. That was something else entirely. Something far more sinister. Judge leaned back in his chair, his instincts, honed by thousands of cases and countless hours of observing human behavior, screaming that he was watching something important unfold. He didn't know what yet, but he knew enough to pay attention. In his experience, children and dogs rarely lied. And both were trying desperately to tell him something. The question was, would he understand before it was too late? Rose from her seat with the grace of someone who'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in front of a mirror. Her heels clicked softly against the hardwood floor as she made her way to the witness stand, each step measured and deliberate. She placed her left hand on the Bible offered by the bailiff, raised her right hand, and swore to tell the truth with a voice that trembled just enough to suggest vulnerability without appearing weak. Judge watched her settle into the chair, smoothing her skirt and folding her hands in her lap, the picture of a concerned, devoted mother. Attorney, a sharp woman in her 50s with a reputation for winning difficult custody cases, approached the witness stand with a warm smile. "Ms., can you please tell the court about your daughter Emma's medical condition?" His eyes glistened with unshed tears as she began. Emma was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when she was just 4 years old. It was devastating. One day she's a normal, healthy toddler, and the next, we're being told she'll need insulin injections for the rest of her life. She paused, pulling a tissue from her pocket and dabbing at her eyes. "But I promised myself that day that I would become an expert in her care. I would be the mother she needed." "And how did you fulfill that promise?" prompted gently. "I learned everything," said, her voice gaining strength. "I took courses on diabetes management. I learned to calculate insulin to carbohydrate ratios, how to recognize the signs of both hyperglycemia and hypoglycemia. I set alarms throughout the night to check her blood sugar levels, sometimes 3-4 times a night. I haven't had a full night's sleep in 3 years, Your Honor." She directed this last statement to Judge, who nodded acknowledgement. Retrieved a thick binder from her table, easily 3 inches of documentation. "Your Honor, I'm presenting Exhibit A, which contains comprehensive medical records documenting Ms. the exceptional care of Emma. These include detailed blood sugar logs, insulin administration records, dietary journals, and documentation of every medical appointment and emergency room visit. As the binder was entered into evidence, continued, Emma's condition is severe and unpredictable. She can go from perfectly fine to life-threateningly ill in minutes. I've had to call 911 17 times in the past 18 months. Her voice cracked. 17 times I've watched paramedics work on my baby girl. 17 times I've ridden in an ambulance, praying she'd survive the trip to the hospital. Judge flipped through the medical records, his expression growing more serious. The documentation was indeed impressive. Meticulous notes, timestamps for every insulin injection, detailed descriptions of Emma's symptoms before each emergency. It painted a picture of a mother who was not only attentive but borderline obsessive about her daughter's care. Ms. continued, can you describe what happens during one of Emma's diabetic emergencies? Leaned forward, her hands gripping the edge of the witness stand. It's terrifying. She'll suddenly become pale, start sweating. Her hands shake and she can't focus her eyes. If I don't act immediately, she could slip into a diabetic coma or worse. I've had to inject her with emergency glucagon 3 times when her blood sugar dropped so dangerously low that she lost consciousness. A tear rolled down her cheek. Each time, I thought I might lose her. And where was Mister during these emergencies? His expression shifted subtly. The tears remained, but something harder entered her eyes. David was rarely there. After he moved out, he became absent. Oh, he'd show up for his scheduled visitation, but when Emma got sick, when she really needed him, he'd find excuses. Too busy with work, too stressed with the divorce. He didn't want to deal with the reality of having a chronically ill child. Across the courtroom, David half stood, his face flushing red. That's not true. His attorney grabbed his arm, pulling him back down, whispering urgently in his ear. Judge rapped his gavel once. Mister, you'll have your opportunity to testify. Please remain seated. Continued, her voice taking on a martyred quality. I've had to do this alone, Your Honor. The midnight blood sugar checks, the insulin calculations, the constant vigilance. Do you know what it's like to be afraid to sleep because your child might die if you're not watching? Do you know what it's like to see your daughter suffer and know that you're the only thing standing between her and death? Nodded sympathetically. Ms., in your professional medical opinion, and I note for the record that you've completed multiple certified courses in diabetes management, is Emma's condition stable enough for shared custody? Absolutely not, said firmly. Emma needs consistency. She needs someone who understands her condition intimately, who can recognize the subtle signs of trouble before they become emergencies. David can't even remember her insulin schedule. Last month, during his visitation, he gave her the wrong type of insulin, fast-acting instead of long-acting. If I hadn't caught it when he dropped her off, she could have gone into severe hypoglycemia overnight. David's attorney, Robert Martinez, jumped up. Objection. That incident was investigated by Child Protective Services and determined to be an honest mistake with no harm done. Sustained, Judge said. Ms., please stick to facts that can be. But the damage was done. Had painted herself as a selfless, exhausted hero, the only person capable of keeping Emma alive. She presented medical journals she'd kept, showing charts and graphs of Emma's blood sugar fluctuations. She described in clinical detail the proper insulin dosages, the timing of injections, the careful balance required to manage the disease. Your Honor, she said, looking directly at the judge with eyes that begged for understanding, I'm not trying to keep David from his daughter. I'm trying to keep our daughter alive. Emma's condition requires expert care, constant monitoring, and immediate response to emergencies. I've dedicated my entire life to providing that care. Can David say the same? From her seat in the gallery, Emma had begun shaking. Bailey pressed against her leg, whining softly. The girl's hands moved again, those same strange signals, more urgent now. 3 taps, 2 fingers down, fist opening and closing. Her eyes were locked on her mother with an expression that Judge couldn't quite read. Fear, sadness, something else. Smiled at her client. Ms. One final question. Do you love your daughter? More than life itself, whispered, fresh tears streaming down her face. Emma is everything to me. She's my whole world. I would do anything to protect her and keep her healthy. Being her mother, caring for her, making sure she survives each day. It's not just what I do, it's who I am. The courtroom sat in heavy silence, absorbing the weight of her testimony. Several people in the gallery wiped at their eyes. Even the court reporter looked moved. Returned to her table, confident she'd established her client as the epitome of maternal devotion. But Bailey's whining grew louder, more insistent. The dog pulled toward the witness stand, straining against Emma's trembling grip. And suddenly, the golden retriever did something unprecedented in Judge's courtroom. He barked. Not once, but twice in rapid succession, then 3 more times in a distinct pattern. The sound shattered the emotional spell had woven. Emma's face crumpled completely, tears now flowing freely down her pale cheeks. Her small body shook with silent sobs as she fought to hold Bailey back, but the dog's training was overpowering his obedience. Something had triggered his alert protocol, something urgent and dangerous. His mask slipped for just a fraction of a second. Her tear-stained face flickered with something else, annoyance, fear, anger before the concerned mother expression returned. But Judge had seen it, and more importantly, David had seen it too. David stood up slowly, his voice shaking but clear. Your Honor, that's the insulin alert. Bailey is trained to bark in that exact pattern, 2 short, 3 long, when he detects dangerous levels of insulin. But he's not alerting to Emma. Every head in the courtroom turned to look at the dog, who was still pulling, still barking, still pointing his entire body toward one specific person. He was alerting too. And suddenly, the perfect testimony, the meticulous records, the devoted mother performance, it all began to look like something else entirely. Something much darker. Something calculated. Something evil. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Voices overlapped, attorneys objecting, spectators murmuring, the bailiff calling for order. But through it all, Judge's eyes remained fixed on Emma, whose small fingers continued their desperate dance in the air. 3 rapid taps against her left wrist. 2 fingers pointing sharply downward. A closed fist that opened and closed, like a heartbeat made visible. Silence. Judge's gavel cracked down hard, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. Everyone will remain seated and quiet, or I will clear this courtroom. The authority in his voice cut through the commotion like a blade. Slowly, the noise subsided into tense, crackling silence. Bailey's barking had stopped, but the dog remained rigid, every muscle in his golden body coiled tight. His nose pointed directly at, who had frozen on the witness stand, her carefully constructed facade of maternal devotion cracking around the edges. Her hands, previously folded demurely in her lap, now gripped the wooden armrests of the witness chair so hard her knuckles had gone white. Mr. Judge said, his tone measured and deliberate, please explain to the court what you meant by insulin alert. David stood slowly, his hands trembling as he gripped the table in front of him. His attorney tried to whisper something to him, but David shook his head. This moment had been coming for 18 months, 18 months of being dismissed, disbelieved, painted as a vindictive ex-husband. He wasn't going to let lawyers and procedures silence him anymore. Your Honor, Bailey isn't just trained to detect low blood sugar in Emma. We had him specially trained to detect insulin itself, the smell of it. Dogs can be trained to smell insulin in concentrations as low as parts per billion. David's voice grew stronger as he spoke. When Emma's insulin levels are dangerously high, which should only happen if someone has overdosed her medication, Bailey alerts with that specific pattern. 2 short barks, 3 long ones. It's unmistakable. That's absurd. The attorney jumped to her feet. Your Honor, this is clearly a desperate attempt to. Ms. Sit down. Judge's command was quiet but absolute. Sank back into her chair, her mouth still open in protest. The judge turned his attention back to David. "Continue, mister, and please be very careful with your words." David took a shaky breath. "About a year ago, I started noticing a pattern. Every time Emma came back from house, within hours she'd have a severe hypoglycemic episode. At first I thought I was imagining it, that the stress of going back and forth was affecting her. But then it kept happening, every single visit, like clockwork." "He's lying," burst out, half rising from the witness stand. "He's making this up because he wants to punish me for leaving him." "Ms., you will remain silent unless asked a direct question," Judge said sharply. He looked at Emma, whose face had gone from pale to almost gray. The little girl was shaking so violently that Bailey pressed his entire body against her legs, trying to stabilize her. "Bailiff, please bring the child a glass of water." As the bailiff moved to comply, David continued, his words tumbling out faster now, as if a dam had finally broken. "I started documenting everything. Times, dates, insulin dosages. Emma is supposed to get 10 units of long-acting insulin in the morning and 5 units of rapid-acting before meals. But when I take her to the emergency room after visits, the doctors said her blood work showed insulin levels consistent with 25, sometimes 30 units in her system." Was on her feet again. "Your Honor, if Mr. had actual concerns about medical abuse, he should have reported them to Child Protective Services, not waited to spring this theatrical performance in court." "I did report it," David's voice cracked. "3 times. CPS investigated and found nothing because is meticulous. She keeps perfect records that show exactly the right dosages. She calls 911 immediately when Emma starts showing symptoms before it's life-threatening. She looks like the hero, always saving Emma at the last possible moment. But Your Honor, I think she's the one causing the emergencies in the first place." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Several people in the gallery gasped. Judge felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. He'd heard of syndrome by proxy, where a caregiver, usually a parent, deliberately causes illness in someone under their care to gain attention and sympathy. But he'd never actually presided over a case involving it. "These are extremely serious accusations, Mr. Judge said slowly. "Do you understand the implications of what you're suggesting?" "I understand that my daughter has been in the emergency room 17 times in 18 months, David said, his voice breaking. "I understand that she's terrified every time I have to send her back to her mother's house. I understand that she's trained her service dog to try to tell people what she's too scared to say herself." All eyes turned to Emma. The bailiff had brought her water, but the glass sat untouched on the bench beside her. Her hands had stopped their frantic signaling and now covered her face as sobs shook her thin shoulders. Bailey had climbed partially into her lap, a breach of his service dog training that spoke volumes about the animal's recognition that his girl was in crisis. Judge made a decision. "Ms., I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want you to answer carefully. Have you, at any time, administered insulin to your daughter in amounts exceeding her prescribed dosage?" His face went through a rapid series of expressions: shock, indignation, fear, and something else that Judge couldn't quite identify. "Your Honor, I resent the implication. I have dedicated my life to keeping Emma alive. I've sacrificed everything, my career, my social life, my sleep. And now I'm being accused of hurting her. This is outrageous." "That's not an answer to my question," the judge said quietly. No, I have never given Emma more insulin than prescribed. Never." His voice rose to a near shout. "David is trying to manipulate this court because he can't handle the guilt of abandoning his sick daughter. He's making me into a villain to justify his own failures as a father." Judge watched Emma's reaction to her mother's words. The child had pulled her hands away from her face and was staring at with an expression of profound sadness and resignation. It was the look of someone who'd told the truth and wasn't believed. Again. Emma, Judge said gently, addressing the child directly for the first time. I need you to help me understand what Bailey is trying to tell us. Can you do that? Emma's eyes widened with fear. She looked at her mother, then at her father, then down at Bailey. The dog licked her face, his tail wagging slightly, encouraging her. The little girl's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. It's okay, sweetheart, the judge said softly. You're safe here. No one is going to hurt you. I just need to understand what your dog is saying. She can't tell you anything because there's nothing to tell. His voice had taken on a desperate edge. She's a child, Your Honor. A frightened, confused child who's been caught in the middle of a bitter divorce. David has probably coached her too. Mommy gives me too much, Emma whispered. The courtroom went absolutely silent. Even the court reporter's fingers froze on the keys. What was that, Emma? Judge leaned forward. Can you say that again louder? Emma's voice was stronger this time, though it still shook. Mommy gives me too much medicine. She uses the big needle instead of the small one. And when I tell her it hurts, she says it's because I need extra to stay healthy. But then I get really, really sick, and she calls the ambulance. Tears streamed down David's face as he listened to his daughter finally speak the words he'd known were true but couldn't prove. Stood up from the witness stand, her composure completely shattered now. She doesn't understand. She's 7 years old. She doesn't know the difference between different insulin types. I'm trying to keep her alive, and she misinterprets it as. And Bailey knows, Emma continued, her voice growing steadier with each word, as if a massive weight was lifting off her small shoulders. I taught him special signals. When Mommy takes out the big needle, I signal Bailey. He smells when the medicine is too much. I couldn't tell anyone with words because Mommy said nobody would believe me. She said everyone would think I was just a kid trying to cause trouble, but I thought maybe someone would believe Bailey. Judge felt his chest tighten. This brave little girl had created her own system to call for help, had trained her service dog to be her voice when her own voice was silenced by fear and manipulation. Your Honor, this is clearly a fantasy, started, but Judge held up his hand. Ms., you need to stop talking, right now. He turned to his bailiff. I want Emma's complete medical records subpoenaed immediately, including all emergency room visits, blood work results, and any security footage from the family's home. I'm also ordering an immediate medical evaluation of Emma by an independent pediatric endocrinologist. He looked at, and his expression was harder than granite. And Ms., until we get to the bottom of this, I'm suspending your custody and visitation rights effective immediately. Scream of protest echoed through the courtroom as the truth she'd hidden for so long finally began to unravel, pulled apart by the silent signals of a desperate child and the faithful alerts of a dog who wouldn't stop trying to save her. David couldn't breathe. For 18 months, he'd been drowning in a sea of doubt and dismissal, watching his daughter suffer while everyone told him he was wrong, paranoid, a bitter ex-husband inventing problems to hurt his former wife. And now, finally, someone was listening. The validation hit him like a physical blow, and he gripped the edge of the defense table to keep from collapsing. Your Honor, David's voice cracked as he spoke, years of suppressed anguish bubbling to the surface. May I approach my daughter? Judge nodded. Yes, but slowly. Bailiff, keep a clear line of sight. David moved around the table with trembling legs, each step feeling both too fast and agonizingly slow. Emma saw him coming and slid off the gallery bench, Bailey moving with her as one fluid unit. Father and daughter met in the middle of the courtroom aisle, and Emma launched herself into his arms with such force that David staggered backward. He caught her, holding her tight against his chest as 18 months of fear, pain, and forced separation poured out of both of them in ragged sobs. I'm sorry, baby girl, David whispered into her hair. I'm so sorry I didn't figure it out sooner. I'm sorry I kept sending you back. I'm sorry. You tried, Daddy. Emma's muffled voice came from where her face was pressed against his shoulder. I heard you on the phone with the CPS lady. I heard you telling the doctors, but Mommy's really good at making people believe her. Bailey sat beside them, his tail wagging now, his alert posture finally relaxing. The crisis his training had prepared him for was finally being addressed. His girl had found her voice, and the danger was being acknowledged. Remained standing at the witness box, her face cycling through emotions so rapidly it was like watching a rage, fear, indignation, desperation. This is insane. David, how can you stand there and let our daughter tell these lies? I'm her mother. I've kept her alive. David turned to face his ex-wife, still holding Emma. His expression was no longer that of a defeated, doubting man. Something had hardened in his eyes, sharpened by the confirmation that his worst fears were real. You didn't keep her alive, you kept her sick. There's a difference. Mr. Judge interjected, I need you to provide the court with a detailed timeline. You mentioned you'd been documenting incidents. Do you have those records with you? David's attorney, Robert Martinez, who had been sitting in stunned silence, suddenly sprang into action. He pulled a thick accordion folder from his briefcase. Your Honor, Mr. has been keeping meticulous records for the past 14 months. We have dates, times, insulin dosages, emergency room visits, and corresponding custody schedules. We didn't present them initially because we were advised they might appear too aggressive, might make Mr. look obsessive or vengeful. I'll see them now, Judge said firmly. As Robert brought the documents forward, David gently set Emma back down but kept one hand on her shoulder, anchoring her to safety. He addressed the judge directly. It started about 4 months after the divorce was finalized, and I were doing 50-50 custody, week on, week off. Emma's diabetes had been relatively stable during our marriage. She'd have the occasional episode, maybe once every couple of months, and we managed it together. David's voice grew stronger as he recounted the timeline, the facts he'd compiled in desperate midnight hours, trying to make sense of a pattern everyone told him didn't exist. The first major incident happened during week. I got a call at 2 in the morning from the hospital. Emma had been found unconscious, severe hypoglycemia. Told me she'd given Emma her normal insulin dose, but somehow Emma's blood sugar had crashed. The doctors said it was probably stress from the divorce. And you accepted that explanation? Judge asked, reviewing the documents Robert had handed him. At first, yes, it made sense. Emma was struggling with the separation. But then it happened again 3 weeks later, and again 2 weeks after that, always during custody time, always in the middle of the night or early morning, 2 to 3 hours after an insulin injection. David's hands clenched into fists. I started asking questions. I asked to let me see her insulin log. She showed me perfect records, every dose exactly as prescribed. I asked the endocrinologist if Emma's condition had worsened. She said no, that Emma's A1C levels actually showed good overall control, which made the acute episodes even more puzzling. Interrupted, her professional composure recovered. Your Honor, Mr. is essentially arguing that his ex-wife is intelligent and thorough in her medical care, and somehow that's evidence of abuse. This is. Ms. One more interruption and you'll be held in contempt, Judge said coldly. He'd lost patience with the attorney's tactics. Mr. Continue. I went to Child Protective Services the first time after the 6th hospitalization, David said, his voice thick with remembered frustration. The caseworker was sympathetic but ultimately dismissed my concerns. She visited his home, reviewed the medical records, interviewed Emma. Everything looked perfect. House was spotless. The medical supplies were organized like a pharmacy. Emma seemed healthy and well cared for, and when they asked Emma if her mother ever hurt her, she said no. Because I was scared, Emma's voice rang out, clear and strong despite her tears. The CPS lady talked to me right in front of Mommy. How was I supposed to say anything with Mommy sitting right there? Judge's expression darkened. He made a note on his legal pad. Interviewing potential abuse victims in the presence of their alleged abuser was a serious protocol violation. David continued, after CPS closed the investigation, things got worse. The incidents increased in frequency. started calling me during Emma's emergencies, crying, begging me to come to the hospital, and I went every time, because regardless of what was happening between us, Emma needed support. His voice dropped to nearly a whisper. But I started to notice something, seemed almost energized at the hospital. She'd be center stage, describing Emma's symptoms to doctors, making decisions, being praised for her quick response. Other parents in the ER would tell her she was amazing, so devoted. Nurses would comment on how lucky Emma was to have such an attentive mother. "That's what good mothers do," shouted. "We respond to emergencies. We get praised because we deserve praise. I've dedicated my entire life to making yourself the hero of a tragedy you created." David cut her off, his voice sharp. "I finally figured it out about 6 months ago when I found research articles about syndrome by proxy on my computer. Emma had been searching for it. A 7-year-old child had to Google her own abuse because none of the adults in her life would believe her." The courtroom went deadly silent. Emma nodded against her father's side, confirming his statement. "I started testing a theory," David continued. "I kept detailed logs of Emma's condition when she was with me, blood sugar levels 4 times a day, every insulin injection documented with photos and timestamps. During my custody weeks, Emma had 0 emergency incidents. Not one. Her blood sugar was stable, her mood was good, she gained weight. But the moment she went back to his house, within 24 to 48 hours, we'd be back in the emergency room." Judge looked up from the documents. "And you reported this pattern to everyone who would listen." CPS again. "They said the previous investigation had cleared and that stable periods with me didn't prove abuse by her. Emma's pediatrician, she suggested Emma might be subconsciously acting out during time because she was angry about the divorce. The police, they said it was a civil custody matter. Even my own family started telling me I was becoming obsessed, that I needed to let it go and focus on co-parenting." David's voice broke. "But how could I let it go when every time I sent my daughter back to her mother, I didn't know if she'd come back alive?" "Daddy always checked on me," Emma said quietly. "Every night during Mommy's week, he'd video call, and I'd try to show him with my eyes with how I acted that something was wrong. But I couldn't say the words because Mommy was always right there, watching." Bailey whined softly and pushed his head under Emma's hand. The dog had been her protector, her voice, her only reliable witness to what was happening behind closed doors. David pulled out his phone, pulling up a folder of videos. "Your Honor, I have months of these video calls. If you watch them, you can see Emma trying to communicate. Sometimes she'd hold up her insulin pen in the background, showing me something. Other times she'd point to Bailey, who would be acting agitated. But I didn't understand what she was telling me until it was almost too late." "What changed?" Judge asked. 3 months ago, Emma had the worst episode yet. She was coding when the paramedics arrived. Her heart had stopped. They revived her, but it was close, too close." David's voice shook with remembered terror. "When I got to the hospital, I found Emma's diabetes supply bag, and inside I found 2 different types of insulin pens, the ones prescribed for Emma and also a higher concentration formula, typically used for adults. Claimed the pharmacy must have given her the wrong type by mistake, but when I checked with the pharmacy, they had no record of filling any prescription for that formulation." Was on her feet. "Your Honor, this is all circumstantial. Different insulin pens don't prove. They prove my ex-wife had access to medications not prescribed for our daughter," David said forcefully. "Medications that, if administered to a child Emma's size, could easily cause life-threatening hypoglycemia. That's when I hired a private investigator and started documenting everything." Judge leaned forward. "And what did your investigation reveal?" David's eyes locked onto that my ex-wife has been systematically poisoning our daughter for 18 months to maintain attention, sympathy, and control. And our daughter has been trying to tell us the whole time. We just weren't listening." The words settled over the courtroom like a death sentence, heavy and final and irrevocable. and from the witness stand, finally began to crack. Judge Chambers felt too small for the weight of what was unfolding. He'd called a 90-minute recess and summoned Dr. Sarah, a pediatric endocrinologist from Denver Children's Hospital, who'd arrived within the hour with Emma's complete medical file. The judge sat behind his desk, reading through page after page of emergency room reports, each one painting a picture that grew darker with every entry. Doctor stood beside him, her finger tracing over lab results with growing horror. She was a woman in her early 40s, with kind eyes that had seen countless sick children, but nothing quite like this. Your Honor, I reviewed Emma's case 3 months ago after her cardiac arrest incident. At the time, I attributed the severity of her episodes to brittle diabetes, a condition where blood sugar is extremely difficult to control. But looking at this pattern now, with the context of potential medical abuse, she paused, her professional composure cracking slightly. This isn't brittle diabetes. This is deliberate insulin overdosing. In the courtroom beyond the closed door, Emma sat with her father on one side and a court-appointed child advocate on the other. Bailey lay across her feet, a warm, reassuring presence. Remained at the plaintiff's table with her attorney, her perfect mask now showing stress fractures, makeup smeared from tears, hands trembling, eyes darting toward the chamber door every few seconds. Back in chambers, Judge looked up from the medical records. Explain it to me in layman's terms, doctor. What exactly are we seeing here? Doctor pulled out a chart she'd created during the recess. Emma's prescribed insulin regimen is straightforward. 10 units of long-acting insulin every morning. 5 units of rapid-acting insulin before each meal, adjusted slightly based on her carbohydrate intake. This should keep her blood glucose in the target range of 8180 dl. She pointed to a series of emergency room reports. But look at these lab results from her hospitalizations. Emma's blood glucose at admission was consistently between 30–45 dl, which is severely hypoglycemic. To achieve levels that low, given her prescribed doses, she'd have to have received 2 to 3 times her normal insulin amount. Could there be any other medical explanation? The judge asked, needing to be absolutely certain. I considered everything: malabsorption disorders, adrenal insufficiency, even factitious hypoglycemia from other causes. But Emma's labs between emergencies are normal. Her A1C, which measures average blood sugar over 3 months, is actually quite good at 7.2%. If she were truly having this many severe low blood sugar events naturally, her A1C would reflect that with higher overall averages, as we'd have to increase her baseline insulin. It doesn't add up medically unless someone is intermittently giving her additional insulin. Judge jaw tightened. What about the timing? Mr. mentioned these incidents happened 2 to 3 hours after injections. That's the smoking gun, Your Honor. Rapid-acting insulin peaks at 2 to 3 hours after injection. If you wanted to cause a severe hypoglycemic episode that looked accidental, you'd overdose the rapid-acting insulin and then discover the child in crisis right at peak effect. Early enough to call 911 and look like a hero, but late enough that the massive dose has already taken effect. Doctor's voice hardened. It's calculated, it's deliberate. And it's sophisticated enough that it took us far too long to recognize. A knock at the door interrupted them. The bailiff entered with a laptop. Your Honor, the police just delivered this. It's security camera footage from the home, subpoenaed from their doorbell camera company. The department's tech unit flagged several relevant clips. Judge gestured for him to play it. The first video showed living room, time-stamped 3 months prior at 7:43 p.m. Emma sat on the couch doing homework, Bailey beside her. Entered the frame carrying Emma's diabetes supply case. The audio was clear. Time for your bedtime insulin, sweetie. His voice came through the speakers, sickeningly sweet. But Mommy, I already had my dinner shot, Emma's small voice responded. I know, but your sugar was a little high earlier. You need a correction dose. The camera angle didn't show the injection itself, but it captured Emma's face. The confusion, the acceptance, the trust of a child who believes her mother knows best. It captured Bailey standing up, moving closer to Emma, his body language changing to alert status. Doctor leaned in. There's no mention in the medical logs of Emma's blood sugar being high that evening. Diabetes journal shows Emma's pre-dinner reading was 142, perfectly acceptable. There was no medical reason for an additional injection. The bailiff clicked to the next video. Same location, different date, timestamped 10:17 p.m. Emma was asleep on the couch. Entered the frame, looked around as if checking to ensure she was alone, and retrieved the insulin kit. She filled a syringe. The camera angle showed her drawing from a vial, not a pen, and the amount she pulled was clearly more than a typical pediatric dose. She approached sleeping Emma and administered the injection into her arm. Emma stirred, whimpering, "Mommy, that hurts." "Baby, Mommy's just giving you your medicine. Go back to sleep." The timestamp on the video was 10:17 p.m. The emergency room record from that same night showed calling 911 at 12:52 a.m., reporting Emma unresponsive. 2 hours and 35 minutes, right in the peak window for rapid-acting insulin. Judge felt sick. "How many of these videos are there?" 8 clips total, Your Honor, the bailiff replied, all showing similar patterns. The tech unit says there are more videos that were deleted from the cloud storage, but they're working on recovery. Doctor pointed at the screen. "Your Honor, I need to note something critical. In that second video, Ms. drew insulin from a vial, not a pre-filled pen. Emma's current prescription is only for insulin pens, which come in fixed concentrations. Vials allow for more precise manipulation of dosage and easier overdosing. The question is, where did she get that vial?" The bailiff clicked through documents on the laptop. The detective assigned to the case just sent this over. They checked pharmacy records. Has been filling prescriptions at 3 different pharmacies over the past 18 months. Each one has records of insulin vials being dispensed, always claiming the previous prescription was lost or damaged. No single pharmacy had a complete picture of what she was obtaining. "That's pharmacy shopping," Doctor said grimly. "It's a red flag for substance abuse or, in this case, abuse of someone else. She was accumulating supplies that wouldn't show up as suspicious at any single location." Judge stood and walked to his window, looking out over downtown Denver. He'd been a judge for 2 decades, had seen humanity at its worst: neglect, violence, cruelty. But this calculated, sustained abuse of a child by the person who should have been her greatest protector felt uniquely monstrous. "What are the long-term effects on Emma?" he asked quietly, "physically and psychologically?" Doctor's expression softened with compassion. "Physically, repeated severe hypoglycemic episodes can cause brain damage, seizures, and cardiac issues. Emma's young brain has been subjected to 18 months of intermittent oxygen deprivation when her blood sugar crashed. We'll need comprehensive neurological testing to assess any damage. Psychologically," she trailed off, searching for words. "That child has been systematically poisoned by her mother while being gaslit into believing it was necessary medical care. She's been taught that her mother's love is expressed through making her sick. The psychological recovery will take years, possibly a lifetime." A softer knock came at the door. The child advocate entered, a woman named Susan Martinez who specialized in abuse cases. "Your Honor, I've spent the recess with Emma. With your permission, I'd like to share what she told me." Judge nodded, gesturing for her to continue. Susan consulted her notes, though her hands shook slightly. Emma has been aware of what her mother was doing for approximately 10 months. She began to realize something was wrong when she noticed the big needle. Her mother used hurt more than the normal ones, and she always felt sick afterward. She tried to tell her father during video calls but was too frightened to be explicit. "Why didn't she tell someone directly?" the judge asked. "She did, Your Honor. She told her school nurse 7 months ago that her tummy shots make her too sleepy. The nurse, following protocol, documented it and called, explained that drowsiness can be a side effect of insulin and praised Emma for being brave about her injections. The nurse had no reason to suspect abuse, was the picture of a devoted medical mother. Judge closed his eyes briefly. Another adult who could have helped, if only they'd understood what they were hearing. Susan continued. Emma also told her grandmother during a visit that she was tired of being sick. The grandmother thought she meant tired of having diabetes, not tired of being made sick. Every attempt Emma made to communicate was interpreted through the lens of a chronically ill child complaining about her condition, not a child reporting abuse. "What about the signals to the dog?" Doctor asked. Emma is remarkably intelligent and resourceful. About 8 months ago, she started researching online, looking up why she felt so sick, why the episodes only happened with her mother. She found articles about syndrome by proxy. She also found information about training service dogs to detect specific medical conditions. Susan's voice filled with admiration mixed with heartbreak. This 7-year-old child, realizing no adults would believe her, began training Bailey to be her witness. She taught him hand signals that meant danger, and reinforced his natural insulin detection abilities to alert specifically when levels were too high. "A child shouldn't have to save herself," Judge said quietly. "No, Your Honor, she shouldn't have, but she did because every adult in her life failed to see what was happening right in front of them." The judge returned to his desk and looked at the stack of evidence before him: medical records, videos, pharmacy receipts, Emma's own heartbreaking testimony. The picture was complete and damning. Had systematically abused her daughter for 18 months, feeding off the attention and sympathy that came from being the devoted mother of a critically ill child. Judge stood, straightening his robes. "It's time to finish this. Doctor, I'll need you to testify. Susan, please ensure Emma is comfortable. She won't need to speak again if she doesn't want to. Bailiff, ask the attorneys to return to the courtroom." As they filed out, Doctor paused. "Your Honor, one more thing. I pulled medical records with a warrant. She has no history of syndrome, no psychiatric diagnoses. But she does have something interesting: dozens of social media posts about Emma's illness, each garnering hundreds of sympathetic comments. She created a blog called Emma's Journey that has thousands of followers. She was even interviewed by local news about being a diabetes warrior mom." The final piece clicked into place. Hadn't just been seeking attention from David or her immediate circle. She'd built an entire public identity around being Emma's heroic caregiver, and she'd been willing to poison her own daughter to maintain that identity. Judge's voice was cold steel. "Let's go put an end to this nightmare." Courtroom had transformed during the recess. What had begun as a routine custody hearing now felt like a criminal trial, the air thick with tension and betrayal. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Word had spread through the courthouse, and off-duty attorneys, clerks, and even other judges had quietly slipped in to witness what was unfolding. Sat rigidly at the plaintiff's table, her attorney whispering urgently in her ear, but wasn't listening. Her eyes were fixed on the chamber door, watching, waiting, knowing that whatever evidence had been reviewed in that closed room was about to destroy her. Judge took his seat, and the bailiff called the court to order. The judge's expression was unlike anything the courtroom regulars had seen before, not the measured neutrality he usually maintained, but barely contained fury wrapped in judicial authority. "Ms.," he began, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade, "I'm going to give you one opportunity to address this court truthfully before I present the evidence that's been compiled during our recess. I want you to understand that what you say in the next few minutes will determine not just the custody of your daughter, but potentially your freedom for decades to come." Stood slowly, her legs visibly shaking. Gone was the composed, martyred mother from earlier. Her makeup was streaked with tears, her perfectly styled hair falling loose from its pins. She looked like what she was, a woman watching her carefully constructed world collapse in real time. "Your Honor, she started, then stopped. Her hands gripped the table edge. "I need to explain. People need to understand why. Why you've been systematically poisoning your daughter." Judge, words were brutal in their directness. "Please, Ms., enlighten us." The courtroom collectively held its breath, put a hand on its arm, shaking her head frantically, the universal attorney signal for "don't say another word," but pulled away from her lawyer's grasp. Something in her had broken during that 90-minute recess, some dam that had been holding back the truth. "I never meant to hurt her," whispered, and then louder, as if trying to convince herself as much as the courtroom. "I never meant to really hurt her. I always called for help. I always made sure she got to the hospital in time. I timed it perfectly every single time." A gasp rippled through the gallery, dropped her head into her hands. David made a sound like a wounded animal, but Judge remained perfectly still, letting continue, knowing that anything he said might stop this confession. "After David left," continued, her voice taking on a distant quality as if she were talking about someone else's life, "nobody cared about us anymore. During our marriage, we were always the perfect family, David the successful architect, me the devoted wife and mother. We got invited to everything, everyone wanted to be around us. But after the divorce," she laughed bitterly, "suddenly we were another statistic, another broken family. People stopped calling, stopped inviting us places. My own mother said I'd failed at the one job I had, keeping my family together. So you made your daughter sick to get attention." Doctor's voice came from where she sat beside the judge, medical disgust dripping from every word. His head snapped toward the doctor. "You don't understand. When Emma got sick, really sick, everything changed. Suddenly David was calling every day. My mother was visiting, bringing food, offering to help. The church started a prayer circle for Emma. Women from my book club would text me constantly, checking in, telling me I was so strong, so brave." Her eyes had taken on a fevered gleam. "People magazine even contacted me about featuring Emma's story. Do you know what that felt like? To matter again, to be important." "So you increased the dosages," Judge said flatly. "You made the episodes more frequent, more severe." Nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. "At first it was just small adjustments, an extra unit here and there, enough to make her blood sugar drop to keep people concerned and checking in. But then Emma would stabilize and people would move on and I'd be alone again, invisible again." Her voice cracked. "So I had to make it worse. I had to make them see that I was needed, that I was doing something important." "You were killing your daughter," David's voice rang out from across the courtroom, strangled with anguish. "You were slowly killing our baby girl for Facebook likes and casseroles from the church." "I wasn't killing her," screamed, whirling to face him. "I was keeping her alive. Every single time I called 911, I did CPR when needed. I saved her life 17 times. She was sobbing now, her entire body shaking. "I'm a good mother, I kept her alive." "You put her in danger in the first place," David shouted back, standing up. "A good mother doesn't poison her child so she can play hero." "Order," Judge Gavel cracked down hard. "Mr. Sit down, Ms. Continue." Sank back into her chair, her face buried in her hands. When she spoke again, her voice was muffled and broken. "I started the blog 8 months after the divorce. Emma's journey. I wrote about our struggles, about the midnight hospital runs, about being a single mother fighting to keep my chronically ill daughter alive. Within 3 months, I had 10,000 followers. People sent donations. A local news station interviewed me. Someone started a GoFundMe that raised $40,000 for Emma's medical expenses." She looked up, mascara streaking her face in dark rivers. "And it felt good. It felt so good to be seen, to be valued, to be told I was making a difference. The blog grew to 50,000 followers. I was invited to speak at diabetes conferences. Other mothers of sick children reached out to me for advice. I mattered." "And when did you realize you'd have to keep making Emma sick to maintain that attention?" Doctor asked coldly. Silence was answer enough. Judge pulled up her blog on the courtroom's display screen. The homepage showed cradling Emma in a hospital bed, both of them looking at the camera with brave smiles. The read, one mother's unwavering devotion to her diabetic warrior daughter. Post after post showed hospital visits, emergency situations, administering injections, Emma looking pale and sick. And every post had hundreds of comments. You're so strong. Emma is lucky to have you. What an inspiration. Mother of the Year. You built an empire on your daughter's suffering, the judge said quietly. An empire you created yourself. Attorney finally found her voice. Your Honor, my client is clearly experiencing a mental health crisis. This confession may not be. Save it, Ms. Judge cut her off. Your client has made clear, coherent statements admitting to 18 months of deliberate medical abuse. She's described her methodology, her motivation, and her full awareness of what she was doing. He turned back to, Ms., did you know that what you were doing was wrong? Hesitated, then slowly nodded. I knew Emma was scared. I knew the injections hurt her. I knew she was starting to figure out what I was doing. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. About 6 months ago, she asked me why she only got really sick when she was with me, and I told her. It was because Daddy's house made her blood sugar unstable, that the stress of going back and forth was dangerous for her. I made her believe it was partially her fault. Emma, who had been silent throughout the confession, let out a small, wounded sound. David pulled her closer, covering her ears, but it was too late. She'd heard her mother admit to gaslighting her, to making her doubt her own reality. And the extra insulin, Judge pressed, where did you get it? 3 different pharmacies. I'd claim I lost the previous prescription, or that the bottle broke. Sometimes I'd say Emma was going through it faster than expected due to illness. Pharmacists always believed me because I had all of Emma's medical records. I knew all the terminology. I was the picture of a concerned, educated mother. His laugh was hollow and bitter. I researched everything. I knew exactly how much to give her to cause a crisis without causing permanent damage. I calculated the timing so I could call 911 with just enough time for them to intervene. I was careful. I was so careful. Except for the time her heart stopped, doctor interjected sharply. 3 months ago, Emma coded in the ambulance. She was clinically dead for 47 seconds. Was that part of your careful calculation? His face crumbled. That was an accident. I gave her the usual amount, but she'd been more active that day. She'd been playing outside at a friend's house. The exercise made the insulin work faster, stronger. I didn't account for that. When I found her, she wasn't breathing. I did CPR for 9 minutes before the paramedics arrived. 9 minutes of thinking I'd actually killed my daughter. She looked at Emma, her expression pleading. Baby, I was so scared. I really was so scared I'd lost you. But not scared enough to stop, Judge observed. Because according to medical records, Emma had 2 more hospitalizations after that near-death experience. Had no answer. The silence stretched out, heavy and damning. Finally she spoke, her voice barely audible. I didn't know how to stop. The blog, the followers, the identity I'd built, it was all I had. Without Emma's illness, without being Emma's devoted mother, I was nobody again. Just another divorced woman in her 30s with no career, no purpose, no value. She looked around the courtroom at the faces staring at her with horror and disgust. I know how this sounds. I know what I am. But you have to understand I was drowning. Being Emma's mother, being needed, being admired for my strength and devotion. It was the only thing keeping me afloat. So you held your daughter underwater with you, David said quietly, his voice thick with tears and rage. You dragged her down into your sickness because you couldn't face your own emptiness. Met his eyes across the courtroom, and for a moment the woman who had once been his wife, the woman he'd loved, married, built a life with flickered in her expression. I'm sorry, she whispered. David, I'm so sorry. Emma, baby, mommy's so sorry. But sorry, Judge knew, would never be enough. Not for the 18 months of terror. Not for the poisoned injections. Not for the stolen childhood. And certainly not for the betrayal of a bond that should have been sacred. Judge Michael had presided over thousands of cases. delivered countless judgments, but he'd never felt the weight of his robes as heavily as he did in this moment. He looked at a woman who had just confessed to systematically poisoning her own child, and felt a cold fury settle in his chest that he had to carefully contain within the bounds of judicial propriety. "Ms., please stand," he commanded, his voice resonating through the silent courtroom. Rose on trembling legs, her attorney beside her looking ashen and defeated, knew there was nothing left to argue, no defense to mount against a full confession delivered in open court. Her client had just destroyed any possibility of a favorable outcome. Judge's eyes were steel. "And, based on your own sworn testimony admitting to deliberate and systematic medical abuse of your minor child, I am immediately and indefinitely revoking all of your parental rights, including custody and visitation. You are not to contact, approach, or communicate with Emma in any way, directly or indirectly." Swayed, grabbing the table for support. "Your Honor, please, she's my daughter. I love her. I just need help. I need therapy. I need—" "What you need," Judge interrupted, his voice like a whip crack, "is to be held accountable for 18 months of child abuse that nearly resulted in your daughter's death. Bailiff, take Ms. into custody." The bailiff moved forward with handcuffs. Eyes went wide with panic. "Wait, Your Honor, I confessed. I told you the truth. Doesn't that count for something?" "It counts as evidence that will be used against you in criminal court," the judge replied coldly. "Your confession demonstrates premeditation, calculation, and sustained intent to harm. You didn't have a moment of poor judgment, Ms. You had 18 months of deliberately poisoning a child who trusted you completely." As the metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the courtroom, began to scream, "No, you can't do this. Emma needs me. She needs her mother. I'm the only one who knows how to care for her diabetes. She'll die without me. Emma, Emma, tell them you need mommy." Emma buried her face in her father's chest, her small body shaking with sobs. Bailey positioned himself between Emma and a low growl rumbling in his throat. The first time the service dog had shown aggression. Even the animal understood that was the threat, not the protector. "Get her out of here," Judge ordered. Two bailiffs now flanked, lifting her bodily as she continued to scream and struggle. "I saved her. 17 times I saved her life. I'm a good mother. Emma, please tell them mommy loves you. Tell THEM." The heavy courtroom doors closed, muffling her desperate cries. The silence that followed felt both hollow and heavy. Several people in the gallery were crying. Others sat in shocked stillness, processing what they'd just witnessed. Judge took a moment to compose himself, removing his glasses and pinching the bridge of his nose. When he spoke again, his voice was gentler. "Mister, please approach with Emma." David stood, Emma clinging to him like a lifeline, Bailey moving in perfect synchronization beside them. They walked to the front of the courtroom, and Judge came down from his bench, an unusual gesture that spoke to the extraordinary circumstances. He knelt to Emma's eye level, his stern judicial demeanor softening into something grandfatherly and kind. "Emma," he said quietly, "I want you to know that none of this is your fault, not one single bit. You did nothing wrong. What happened to you was abuse, and you were incredibly brave to find a way to ask for help when the adults around you weren't listening." Emma's tear-stained face looked up at him. "Is mommy going to jail?" Judge chose his words carefully. "Your mother is going to go to a place where she can get help for her problems and where she can't hurt you anymore. She's very sick, Emma, not in her body but in her mind, and she needs to be away from you while she gets treatment." "Will I ever see her again?" Emma's voice was so small, so fragile. "That's a decision you'll get to make when you're older and ready. Right now, my job is to make sure you're safe and healthy. Do you understand?" Emma nodded slowly, then surprised everyone by asking, "Can I say something?" "Of course, sweetheart. This is your courtroom too." Emma turned to look at the closed doors where her mother had been taken, and when she spoke, her voice was clearer and stronger than anyone expected. I forgive Mommy because she's sick, but I don't want to see her right now. Maybe not for a long time. She scared me every day. I was always waiting for the next shot, the next time I'd wake up in the hospital. I just want to feel safe again." The wisdom and grace in those words from a 7-year-old left the courtroom stunned. Judge felt his throat tighten with emotion. "You're an extraordinary young lady, Emma, and I promise you, you're going to be safe now." He stood and turned to David. "Mister, I'm granting you sole legal and physical custody of Emma, effective immediately. I'm also ordering a comprehensive evaluation by doctor and her team to assess any medical complications from the abuse, as well as mandated trauma therapy for both you and Emma." David's voice broke. "Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing us when so many others didn't." "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner," Judge said, and there was real regret in his tone. "The system failed Emma. CPS failed her. The medical community failed her. I'm going to make sure we learn from this case so it doesn't happen to another child." He returned to his bench and addressed the court reporter. "I want a complete transcript of today's proceedings sent to the Colorado Department of Human Services, the American Medical Association, and every family court in the state. This case will serve as a training example for identifying syndrome by proxy." Doctor stepped forward. "Your Honor, with your permission, I'd like to establish a comprehensive care plan for Emma, starting immediately. She'll need neurological testing to assess any brain damage from repeated hypoglycemic episodes, cardiac monitoring, and most importantly, a complete reset of her diabetes management with a new medical team not associated with her mother's manipulation." "Approved. Whatever Emma needs, she gets. And doctor, I want you to personally oversee her care. Submit all bills to the court. Assets will be liquidated to cover Emma's medical and therapeutic expenses." The judge then turned to the assistant district attorney who had quietly entered during confession. "Ms., I trust you'll be filing criminal charges." Ada Jennifer stood, her expression grim. "Multiple counts, Your Honor. Medical child abuse, assault, child endangerment, fraud regarding the GoFundMe donations, insurance fraud for false medical claims. Ms. is looking at 15 to 25 years in prison." Judge nodded. "Make it count. This child deserves justice." He looked back at Emma, who was now sitting on her father's lap, Bailey's head resting on her knee. "Emma, I know this has been the scariest day of your life, but I want you to remember something. You saved yourself. You found a way to speak your truth when nobody was listening. You trained Bailey to be your voice. You never gave up hope that someone would eventually understand. That's not just brave, that's heroic." Emma managed a small smile. "Bailey's the real hero. He never stopped trying to tell everyone." As if understanding the praise, Bailey's tail thumped against the floor, and the courtroom released some of its tension in soft laughter. Judge continued, his tone becoming more official. "I'm establishing a trust fund using the proceeds from blog, social media accounts, and the GoFundMe campaign, approximately $73,000. This money, earned through Emma's exploitation, will be held in trust for Emma's education, medical care, and future needs. None of it will be accessible to." David's eyes widened. "Your Honor, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll use it to give Emma the life she deserves, the life she should have had all along." "I will, I swear I will." Judge made several more orders. Mandatory reporting training for Emma's school, notification to all of doctors about the abuse so they could review their protocols, and a restraining order extending for 10 years even after his eventual release from prison. Finally, he addressed Emma one last time. "Miss Emma, I'm going to check on you personally. Every 6 months, I want you and your dad to come back to this courtroom, and you're going to tell me about all the good things happening in your life. I want to hear about school, about friends, about Bailey's adventures. I want to watch you grow up healthy and happy. Is that a deal?" Emma nodded enthusiastically. "Deal, Judge." "Your Honor," he corrected gently. "But when we're just talking, you can call me Mike." As the family, now just father and daughter plus one very good dog, prepared to leave the courtroom, David turned back. "Your Honor, what made you finally see what was happening? What made you believe us when so many others didn't?" Judge thought for a moment. "Two things. First, I watched Emma try to communicate through her signals to Bailey, and I saw genuine fear in a child's eyes. Children don't manufacture that kind of terror. Second, I've learned over 20 years on this bench that the truth has a weight to it. Your desperation was real, his performance was polished, and Emma's silence was louder than anyone's words." He paused, then added quietly, "And maybe, after all these years, I finally learned to listen to what wasn't being said out loud. Sometimes the most important testimony is the one a child gives with her hands, her eyes, and her faithful dog." As they walked out of the courtroom into the bright Denver afternoon, Emma looked up at her father. "Daddy, can we go home now? To your home?" "Yes, baby girl, we're going home, and you never have to leave again." Bailey barked once, a sound of joy and relief, and for the first time in 18 months, Emma laughed. The healing had finally begun. 6 months had passed since that devastating day in court, and the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Emma walked through the familiar courthouse doors on a bright April morning, but she was barely recognizable as the pale, frightened child who had sat trembling in Judge's courtroom half a year ago. Her cheeks now held a healthy pink glow, her dark hair shone with vitality, and most importantly, her eyes sparkled with the genuine happiness that had been stolen from her for so long. Bailey trotted beside her with equal confidence, his service vest still in place but his demeanor relaxed and joyful. The golden retriever had also transformed, no longer constantly on high alert, no longer watching for dangers that came from within Emma's own home. He was still her protector, still her companion, but now he could also just be her friend. David held Emma's hand as they walked down the marble corridor, but his grip was gentle now, not the desperate clutch of a father terrified he might lose his daughter at any moment. He'd put on weight himself, the stress-induced gauntness replaced by healthy muscle. He smiled freely, something courthouse regulars who remembered his haunted expression from 6 months ago noticed immediately. "Are you nervous, sweetheart?" David asked as they approached Judge's courtroom. Emma shook her head, her ponytail swinging. "Nope, I want to show Judge Mike all my good stuff. I brought my report card and everything." The courtroom was different this time, empty except for a few key people. Dr. Sarah sat in the front row, medical files in hand but wearing a broad smile. Susan Martinez, the child advocate, waited with a progress report. And Judge himself stood at the doorway of his chambers, having shed his formal robes for a simple suit, making this visit feel less like a legal proceeding and more like what it truly was, a wellness check on a child he'd come to care about deeply. "Emma," Judge's face lit up as they entered. "And Bailey, come here, both of you." He knelt down, and Emma ran to him without hesitation, giving him a hug that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. She'd been too frightened to trust any adult's touch back then. Bailey wagged his entire body, accepting the judge's ear scratches with dignified pleasure. "Your Honor, I mean, Judge Mike, look." Emma pulled a folded paper from her backpack. "I got straight A's, and look at this one. My teacher wrote, 'Emma is a joy to have in class.' Last year she wrote, 'Emma seems tired and distracted.' But now I'm not tired anymore." Judge examined the report card with exaggerated seriousness, nodding approvingly at each grade. "This is outstanding work, Emma. I'm so proud of you." He looked up at David. "Mister, shall we sit down and go through the official updates?" They settled into the jury box, a casual arrangement that made the meeting feel less formal. Doctor joined them, flipping open Emma's medical file with visible satisfaction. "Your Honor, I'm pleased to report that Emma's diabetes management has been textbook perfect for the past 6 months," Doctor began. "She hasn't had a single emergency hospitalization. Not one. Her A1C has dropped from 7.2 to 6.8, which indicates even better control than before. Her growth chart shows she's gained 11 pounds, all healthy weight, and she's grown 2 inches. How is that possible? Judge asked, though he knew the answer. According to testimony, Emma's condition was severe and unpredictable. It was never severe, doctor said flatly. Emma has perfectly manageable type 1 diabetes. With proper dosing, actual proper dosing, and normal childhood activity, her blood sugar remains stable. The unpredictable nature of her condition was entirely manufactured by someone deliberately overdosing her insulin. David squeezed Emma's shoulder gently. We've established a routine that works. Emma tests her blood sugar 4 times a day, I administer her insulin exactly as prescribed, and we keep a food diary. But more importantly, Emma knows her own body now. She can tell me when she feels off and we adjust together. No more secrets, no more fear. And the neurological testing? Judge asked, concern flickering in his eyes. Doctor's expression grew more serious. We did comprehensive cognitive and neurological assessments. The good news is that Emma shows no signs of permanent brain damage from the repeated hypoglycemic episodes. She was incredibly lucky, or perhaps careful calculations inadvertently prevented the worst outcomes. However, Emma does show some signs of medical trauma. She becomes anxious around hospitals and sometimes has nightmares about injections. I see a therapist now, Emma interjected matter-of-factly. Her name is Doctor and she's really nice. She has toys in her office and we talk about my feelings. She says it's okay that I still love my mommy even though mommy hurt me. She says feelings are complicated. Judge's expression softened. Doctor is very wise, and she's right, feelings are complicated. How are you doing with all of that, Emma? Emma thought for a moment, her face scrunching up in concentration, a childlike gesture that reminded everyone present that despite her extraordinary ordeal, she was still just 7 years old. I'm sad sometimes. I miss having a mommy, but I don't miss being scared. I wrote mommy a letter last month. Doctor helped me. I told her I forgive her, but I'm not ready to see her yet. Maybe when I'm older, maybe not. And that's okay. That's very mature of you, Judge said gently. And it's okay if your feelings change over time. You don't owe anyone a relationship, Emma, not even your mother. Susan Martinez spoke up, consulting her notes. Emma's been attending a support group for children who experienced medical abuse. It's a small group, only 4 other kids in the state with similar experiences, but Emma says it helps to talk to other children who understand. Emma nodded enthusiastically. There's a boy named who's 9, and his dad was giving him medicine to make him throw up all the time. And there's a girl named Sophie who's 10, and her mom was putting stuff in her food to make her sick. We all have different stories, but we all get it, you know. We get what it's like when the person who's supposed to protect you is the one hurting you. The adults sat in heavy silence for a moment, reminded once again of the profound betrayal these children had endured. David cleared his throat, changing the subject to lighter topics. Emma also joined the school art club. She's been painting. Show Judge Mike your picture, honey. Emma pulled out her phone, swiping through photos until she found the one she wanted. It showed a large canvas painting of Bailey, rendered in bright, joyful colors, blues, golds, and greens that seemed to glow with happiness. The dog in the painting wore a cape, and behind him was a little girl with her arms raised in triumph. It's called Bailey the Superhero, Emma explained, because he saved me. The art teacher entered it in a state competition, and I won a blue ribbon. It's going to be displayed in the Denver Art Museum for a whole month. Judge studied the image, genuinely moved. Emma, this is extraordinary. You have real talent. I want to be an artist when I grow up, Emma said confidently. Or maybe a veterinarian so I can help other service dogs, or maybe both. I have no doubt you'll be whatever you set your mind to, the judge replied. David pulled out his own phone, showing a series of photos, Emma at the state fair, Emma blowing out birthday candles, Emma and Bailey playing in a park, Emma laughing with school friends. Each image told a story of a childhood reclaimed, of joy rediscovered. "We've also been doing normal family things," David said. "Movie nights, weekend hikes, teaching Emma to ride a bike, all the things we couldn't do before because every week was dominated by medical crises. Last month, we went camping for the first time. Emma tested her blood sugar under the stars and thought it was the coolest thing ever." Judge smiled, but then his expression grew more serious. "And how are you doing, mister? Parenting a child recovering from this kind of trauma can't be easy." David's eyes glistened. "I'm in therapy too, Your Honor. I carry a lot of guilt about not figuring it out sooner, about all the times I sent Emma back to's house. My therapist says I couldn't have known that was sophisticated in her manipulation, but—" His voice cracked. "I'm her father. I should have protected her." "Daddy, stop," Emma said firmly, placing her small hand on his. "You did protect me. You kept asking questions. You kept fighting even when nobody believed you. You taught me to trust Bailey. You saved me too." David pulled his daughter into a tight hug, and Judge had to look away for a moment, his own emotions threatening to overwhelm his judicial composure. Susan Martinez provided additional updates. David has also connected with a support group for parents of children with syndrome by proxy. He's been helping other fathers recognize warning signs and navigate the legal system. He's actually become a bit of an advocate. "It's the least I can do," David said. "If Emma's story can help even one other child get help sooner, then maybe some good can come from what we went through." Judge nodded approvingly. "And what about, has there been any contact?" "She's written several letters," David said carefully. "All sent through her attorney as per the restraining order. They're being held in a file for Emma to read when, if she's ever ready. Is currently serving her sentence at the Colorado Women's Correctional Facility. She's in a psychiatric treatment program and by all accounts is doing the work to understand her disorder." "She pled guilty to all charges," Susan added. "She's serving a 15-year sentence with possibility of parole after 10. As part of her plea agreement, she's permanently surrendered her parental rights. She can request supervised visitation when Emma turns 18, but only if Emma consents." Emma had been playing with Bailey's ears during this discussion, but now she looked up. "Doctor says that maybe someday I'll want to hear Mommy's side of the story, but right now I just want to be a regular kid. I want to think about art and school and my friends and Bailey. Is that okay?" "That's more than okay," Judge assured her. "That's exactly what you should be thinking about." He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small wrapped package. "I have something for you, Emma. I hope this is appropriate, but I wanted you to have it." Emma unwrapped it to find a beautiful leather journal with her name embossed on the cover. "It's for your thoughts, your feelings, your art ideas, whatever you want. Sometimes writing things down helps us process them, and someday when you're older, you'll be able to look back and see how far you've come." Emma hugged the journal to her chest. "Thank you, Judge Mike, I love it." Judge stood, signaling the meeting was concluding. "Emma, you came into my courtroom 6 months ago as a frightened child trapped in an impossible situation. Today, you're here as a thriving, healthy, confident young lady with a bright future ahead of you. I want you to know that I'm proud to have played a small part in your journey." "Small part?" Emma looked puzzled. "Judge Mike, you listened when nobody else would. You believed Bailey. You saved my life. That's not a small part." The judge had to clear his throat before speaking. "Well then, I'm honored to have been your ally, and I'll see you again in 6 months." "Definitely. Next time I'll bring my next report card. I'm going to get straight A's again." As they prepared to leave, Judge called out one more time. "Emma, one last thing. What does happiness feel like now?" Emma thought for a moment, then smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile of pure childhood joy. "It feels like waking up and not being scared. It feels like eating breakfast without wondering if this is the meal that's going to hurt. It feels like knowing that when Daddy gives me my insulin, he's helping me, not hurting me. It feels like Bailey sleeping at the foot of my bed instead of staying on alert all night." She paused, then added simply, "Happiness feels like being safe." Judge watched them leave, a father, a daughter, and a faithful dog walking out into the sunshine. Emma skipped down the courthouse steps, Bailey keeping perfect pace with her, and David's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, protective but not possessive. 6 months ago, he'd witnessed one of the darkest cases of child abuse he'd ever encountered. Today, he'd witnessed something equally powerful, the resilience of a child, the strength of a devoted father, and the beginning of true healing. Judge Michael returned to his chambers, sat at his desk, and pulled out a file. He'd been compiling a comprehensive report on syndrome by proxy for judicial training programs across the country. Emma's case would be the centerpiece, a cautionary tale about how easily sophisticated abusers can fool the system, and how critical it is to listen to what children communicate, even when they can't use words. But more than that, it would be a story of hope, because Emma hadn't just survived, she was thriving, and that made all the difference. As he wrote the final section of his report, Judge titled it, "Listening to the Silent Voices: How a 7-year-old Girl and Her Service Dog Exposed Systematic Medical Abuse." Below the title, he added a dedication, "For Emma, Bailey, and all the children still searching for someone who will listen." Outside in the Denver sunshine, Emma laughed as Bailey chased a butterfly, and the sound carried on the wind like a promise that even after the darkest nights, morning eventually comes. And this morning was just the beginning. The end.